Hi, everybody. Welcome. I see we've got some colleagues online. Please, those of you that are sitting at the back, please do come forward and sit around the table. We're quite a small group at this stage, so it'll be good to see your faces. So welcome back to those of you we met this morning, and to those of you who weren't able to join us this morning, welcome to the meeting. I think it was a very interesting session this morning, and I really look forward to continuing it a bit more in more depth this afternoon. So my name is Kerry Albright. I'm the Deputy Director, Principal Advisor of Evaluation here. It's a real pleasure to welcome you. I send greetings and apologies from my Director of Evaluation, Rob McCouch. He would be here. He's very interested in this particular initiative, but unfortunately, it is UNICEF's Executive Board meeting this week, so he can't be in two places at once yet. But he sends his greetings to everyone and is very engaged and interested in this. I also said before we get on to opening the meeting more specifically, it's my honor as host to also give some more prosaic remarks. So if anybody would like the restroom, the fantastic thing about this meeting room is that you can just get out, you don't need to be escorted, but you can't access the restrooms easily. So just go back to the counter, they'll open the gates and it's literally downstairs, they'll point you, it's very, very close. But just making sure that everybody feels comfortable. Okay, so thank you very much again. I will hand over to Oscar as our co-host. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kerry. Delighted to be in UNICEF House this afternoon. Good evening, colleagues online. Good afternoon. Yes, we are about to start a more in-depth meeting with the technical details of the coalition, right? And so many of the questions that you had this morning will be probably answered in two presentations. Again, I'm going to hand the floor very shortly to Ana Rosa Suarez to get us into the content and the specifics of this meeting, in particular in terms of what we expect to get out of it. And also Thomas will be getting into more detail into the methodological approaches for the synthesis. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ana Rosa.
Thank you, Oscar. Good afternoon, colleagues. This morning, I couldn't quite see one side of the room. So I figured I would try a different angle. I hope our colleagues online can also see and hear me. For the ones that don't know me, good afternoon. I'm Ana Suarez. I'm the Chief of Evaluation Synthesis and Lessons in UNDP, Independent Evaluation Office. But I'm here in a different position with my other hat as part of the Secretariat for the SDG Synthesis Coalition Secretariat. So welcome and thank you to UNICEF for nicely kindly hosting us over here. I want to acknowledge that we have about 25 people online, which is very important because we have about 25 people here, which is possibly too large of a management group, but it is the perfect number of people to really talk about some of the issues that I'm going to get to in the end of this very short presentation. So this meeting is really for partners. We hope there will be more that will join us along the way, but this is more for the colleagues that are more interested in learning a bit more about the work that we to present with this coalition, but also really to get to some key questions on how to move forward, some next steps. But since there may be some people that were not present in the morning, I'm going to go quickly over a few very issues before getting to, I need to speak closer to the mic. Okay. Before I move into the last slide, which is the agenda. So next slide. So the slides. We tried with that. Anyways, that's it. That's the slide. Okay. The idea was really to just quickly recap what we were going, the main objectives of the SDG coalitions, explain the governance structure, solicit again some of the nominations to the various governance groups and discuss a strategy for resource mobilization for the next 4 pillars that we're going to work on. So basically, we went through this before. The main goals of this initiative is to produce 5 syntheses of the SDG pillars: planet, peace, poverty, prosperity. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. People and planet. The idea, of course, started as just reports, synthesis with lessons and recommendations, but we hope in the process of developing this synthesis to also work together to generate the functionalities of a network of partners and a platform with evidence that other partners can access evidence and generate their own synthesis as well. Next slide, please. So the idea is we will deliver with the synthesis, we'll provide robust evidence of what has worked, what has not worked, and why in different contexts. We hope to highlight key insights on barriers and enablers to accelerate the achievements of the SDGs and generate lessons and recommendations on how to accelerate progress towards the SDGs. Next slide. With so many partners, as you heard this morning, we have 37 UN entities in a growing number of bilateral and multilateral organizations, as well as international evaluation networks. To organize around this multitude of partners and data and evidence that we come through to process into synthesis and coherent lessons and recommendations, we're organized in the Secretariat, coordinate the partners, the meetings, the events, be in charge of the financial and administrative matters. At this moment, UNDP is in charge of the Secretariat. Then we'll have a steering committee that will be composed of high-level government officials and the heads of evaluation networks to give the right prominence to the initiative. This committee will steer the coalition, but also validate key learning needs for the synthesis, secure broad member state participations from the South and the North, highlighting the utility and learning component of this initiative, to promote real uptake of the recommendations and have the coalition raise the necessary funds in kind and in-kind support to conduct the synthesis. There will be also a technical advisory panel for each of the syntheses. The panels will be composed of subject matter experts from around the world. They will oversee and quality assure the synthesis. They will also ensure the relevance, conceptual clarity, accuracy of the synthesis results, and especially the recommendations. And lastly, there will be the management group for each of the syntheses. These groups will be composed of the most committed partners for each of the pillars. They will manage the exercise and mobilize human and financial resources needed. The members of the management group will also provide support to the synthesis teams in helping to gather and access data and evidence from evaluation reports. And it will also help to identify experts for the technical advisory panels that will quality assure the reports. And in the end, this group will also be the one responsible for ensuring timely delivery of this. Next slide. So what you can see in the slide is how much interest we've got so far. To see there are agencies that have already made up their mind in terms of what pillars they're interested in engaging with. It's not all the 37, because some of them are still deciding on what pillar they're going to be involved, or what they're going to on all the pillars, or in some way in a different format. For example, as part of the steering committee or contributing to the advisory panel, but not necessarily just in one of the pillars. But I want to make sure you saw some of the partners that we have there. You don't have countries listed there, but we do have a growing number of countries also identifying which pillars or whether they're going to be in all or multiple pillars. I'm hoping in the future to see this number growing, and we will be able to identify which ones are champions for each of them. Next. So why are we here today? We had a very productive meeting this morning with member states where we briefed everyone about our idea. We hope to get some additional support from them and engagement. But this meeting, I wanted to make sure we had a separate meeting to discuss more of the specific issues that we wanted to address. So basically, I wanted to have a round of conversations about how to identify or confirm co-leads for each of the syntheses. The first synthesis on partnership is set. It's very much being led by UNDP with the support of Canada and mostly in Spain. We have others very strong supporters, but and in Ireland as well. But there's a number of other supporters deciding whether they're co-chairing or just engaging in different formats. We hope to secure nominations to the steering committee. I wanted to bring this issue to this meeting because at the moment, UNDP has been having bilateral conversations with different member states, but it may be interesting for other agencies and even member states to be engaged in some of these conversations as well and encourage the right participation so we have the right prominence of this steering committee and form this committee as soon as possible. Then I would like to identify and confirm members of the management for each. We have identified few names for each of the pillars. The number one, for partnerships, this is a bit more specific, but it will be interesting that in the next few days, I would welcome that each agency submit their names if they are going to really engage in the management for each of them. The same in terms of submitting names of experts for technical advisory. These are subject matter experts. We want to make sure this is a balanced group of top-notch experts that can really guide the team in this initial period if possible, if we're fast enough. If not, please to quality assure the multiple outputs that will be produced, and especially to engage in the process of developing the recommendations. As evaluators, we're used to producing recommendations, synthesis experts as well, but this is at a different level of recommendations that we hope to produce need to be very strategic and political, strategically thought through. So we hope to have this advisory panel guidance in this process. Then we need to mobilize sufficient financial resources to commission the synthesis of the other forms. We don't need to have the resources immediately, but we need to have pledges that would allow us to start meeting and decide when is it enough to move forward, or do we wait a little? And ideally, we would like to do this simultaneously or sequentially so we can learn from one exercise to the other and also consider seriously the integrative aspect of the SDGs. Then we need to coordinate a strategy to mobilize this resource with the pillar co-leads and so we don't necessarily go alone or duplicate efforts, but we do this in a strategic way that members and partners, donors are really valuable. We approach them as a coalition, not just from a union network. And then, of course, we need to develop a communication and update strategy. It doesn't need to be immediate, but it is a very important component. In the end of all this, we're not hoping to produce 5 reports and just have a shelf unless the instrument is really used and the recommendations really have the proper uptake. 5, 10, 15 years may never be enough. So we're hoping to really start the conversation around these issues. So this is where I wanted to leave you, and perhaps we can have a quick round of discussions, and then we will move into some of the methodological components that Thomas introduced in the morning, and we can go a bit deeper perhaps, or specific on some issues after we have a round of discussions on some of these topics. Thank you. Mr.
Thank you, Ana Rosa. Thank you very much, colleagues. So let's go back to the questions, please. And we can start with question number 1. Identify colleagues in the synthesis, right? You have with you this flyer where you can see the specific SDGs for each pillar. People's pillar comprises SDG 1, 3, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Planet pillar, SDG 6, 12, 13, 14, 15. Prosperity pillar, SDG 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. The peace pillar, 16, and the partnership pillar, 17. So, in the latest United Nations Evaluation Global Meeting that took place last week in Washington, we had preliminary conversations with some of the agencies, some pillars. So, on the planet pillar is somewhere where we can already start showing some women. The United Nations Environment Program unit is interested in coordinating this exercise. UNEP as normative agency in the Secretariat plays a very important role in that. And the other agency is the Green Climate Fund. So that's more an operational agency that really finances the position towards SDGs in various aspects related to water, sanitation, sustainable consumption, production, climate action, life under water, life on land, right? Which are the SDGs related to climate. May I open the floor to see if there are any reactions towards the importance of working on the planning pillar, and if there are interest in joining that initiative? And go back also to the slide of the pillars agencies. There you go. And let me open the floor here for further participation. Now I see that we have 30 participants online and 1 comment in the chat. So the floor is open. Can you hand the microphone to the floor? I think it's on. That's
there. So hi everyone, my name is Zena Nessi. I'm the head of evaluation for Global Affairs Canada, also the vice chair of OCDAC Development. I have an idea that's half formed in my head, so I'm hoping to form some as I speak. On the planet pillar, I'm just thinking of Canada. The evaluations I do very rarely is doing development. They rarely touch exclusively on the environment, but I can say that my Department of Environment Canada have a lot of valuable work in just looking nationally. I wonder for the partnership pillar in particular, if this is one of those that goes well beyond development agencies and development concerns and into sort of, I don't know, national developed countries. I don't know, I'm not using the right words, but do you see what I mean here? And if those partners perhaps are not around this table. I know from a bilateral side, from my side, they're around this table, and perhaps people at Environment Canada, for example, may be very interested in this. But I haven't approached them about this yet, so it's something to think about from a bilateral side, perhaps.
Thank you, Isabel, and let me welcome you to the meeting. We're delighted to have you, as your Canada, and of course, the Environment partners, which is a network of coalition offices of policy that have been very important and strong this initiative since last year when we started in June. Therefore, your comment is really very much appreciated. I think you're right, because one important distinction between the SDGs and the SDGs is the global nature of the goals. Therefore, you might be right in terms of the need to reach out to additional bilateral partners beyond the ones that were exclusively on development, right? But yes, and now I see that we have also some comments from the chat. We can give the floor to the work program. Also express some interest. Judith, you want to take the floor, please?
Sure, thanks very much. I hope everyone can hear me. Yeah, okay. Well, first of all,
Oh, yeah.
Here we go. Okay, let's try again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Wonderful. Okay, so first of all, thanks very much to UNDP for organizing this work and for bringing partners together for this very important undertaking. We see this as a key opportunity for the evaluation community to harness learning from the SDG experience and to provide evaluation efforts to make decisions beyond 2023 and beyond. And WFP is very happy to contribute to the partnership pillar, the people pillar, and to the planet pillar, which we were not yet involved in. So there were a couple of questions that came from the previous discussion, and it was very clear that the recommendations will be used in intergovernmental decision-making processes. And we just wanted to kind of open up the discussion a little bit. If it's expected that there will be no formal system-wide management response to the recommendations, we just may want to reflect on the use and actionability of the recommendations and just kind of to understand how the recommendations will be taken forward and if there is any type of management response that's expected from any of the agencies. And the other thing that we wanted to just ask about, and thanks very much to Ana Rosa for explaining a bit more about the governance arrangements. The TOR don't differentiate between those partners that have made financial contributions and in-kind contributions and those that are providing evidence. I don't know that there's necessarily a need for differentiation, but we just wanted to understand a little bit about the accountability requirements, whether that's the same for all partners irrespective of financial contribution, or whether there's a different type of accountability that will be provided. Finally, if you could kindly clarify the decision-making process and who's responsible for signing off and draft and final deliverables. That's a little bit kind of further into the nitty-gritty of this conversation. That's something that we were wondering about. That's all for me for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith. We have more questions. Have more questions, perhaps we should start addressing this. In terms of the use and actionability of the recommendations, that is something also. Okay, yeah, perhaps closer. In terms of the use and actionability of the recommendations, I think it is the aim that this will be definitely very much useful recommendations, and yes, they are to inform the intergovernmental negotiations, but I'm confident that we will be able to provide very actionable recommendations, the ways of either reinforcing current approaches that are working or suggesting adjustments to approaches that are not working. At this stage of the exercise, I think it would be difficult to anticipate what are the nature of the recommendations, since we have not gone through the analysis of the evidence yet. Therefore, I'm not able to say more than that. It is the overall intention of the management team as well as users that those recommendations would be actionable, useful. In terms of the different contributions provided by countries, either financial or in-kind, I think both are very much welcome, because there are some partners who are able to contribute financially, and that is greatly appreciated. We have a financial gap, which is not that significant, because we think that the overall budget for this exercise in comparison to the benefits that it yields is almost rigid. However, we need the resources to cover that gap. In terms of the in-kind contribution, those are also very much welcome. But I don't think there is a differentiation in terms of accountability, because we are really in the spirit of co-creation. In that sense, it's not that if you put money, you speak louder. If you don't put money, you speak with a softer voice. And that's not the spirit. I know that you don't imply that, but we're not differentiated the accountabilities. Where's the contribution? We really think that different countries should contribute to the extent of their possibilities, and some contributions are as valuable as others, including through the data or the nomination of people to be in the advisory panels or in the steering. By the same token, about the accountability regarding the deliverables, I understood correctly the question. I don't know if you're asking about follow-up mechanisms to these recommendations, but I think I didn't fully understand the question. But I see Ana Rosa stand up. Perhaps you can go.
Well, yes, just regarding who would be responsible for the final draft of the different syntheses. I have a suggestion. We haven't really made a decision on that, but I have a suggestion that, having worked on joint exercises, never of this large nature of 37 entities and 30 plus more that shall come, I would suggest that the chairs of the management group are responsible to work with the advisory panel to finalize the report, and of course the team. So the advisory panel is really the ones responsible for quality assuring the report, not the management group. But the management group is able to talk about methods, ensure political sensitivities, look at certain aspects that we perhaps know differently from subject matter experts, but they really know the subjects, the topics. But then in the end, we need to produce a report or some sort of format to be made public. And I would like to suggest that one way is the 2, 3, or 4, how we decide who are the chairs of the management group would be the ones responsible for finalizing, closing the report, or how we're going to present the recommendations, because we may even make a decision to not necessarily issue a bulky report, but issue lessons and recommendations in a different format in the platform of evidence that we're going to develop. So this is a co-creation. It's open. As Oscar mentioned, the focus here is not accountability. The SDGs have their own accountability structure. The focus here is learning, is to generate lessons and promote recommendations that could help accelerate the achievement of the SDGs, and not really necessarily hold countries accountable. That is not our job. from the sense of a core mission. Question.
Thank you very much, Ana Rosa. I think that was very clear. Colleagues, the floor is open to continue. Please, Deborah.
Very much, Deborah McQueen from UNDP. I was holding back, thinking we were trying to stick to that very first question. We've broken the barriers. So just perhaps on, I'm not sure. Sorry. On this last point, actually, I hadn't yet fully realized that the quality assurance role was placed at the level of the technical advisory panel. And in fact, one of my questions before I noted that was, in fact, how we will be selecting, identifying expertise, technical expertise. So I think this, for me now, is a really important point. Thinking of each pillar, I had immediately thought of subject matter experts, which I think is in keeping what you just mentioned, Anna. But when I think about, I think we still need to be very, very clear about the role of the management group in, I know it's not an approval, but I liken it to any of our organization's evaluation processes. And again, I know it's not an evaluation, but the process whereby we get technical advice and inputs from technical experts that are in a sense advisory in nature, and that the management group has the final say in a sense. And I would like just clarity perhaps on that, because I think there's a validity in that structure that most of us have set up for evaluative work. So just perhaps a little bit of further thought on that. And if possible, is there clarity now by pillar of potential co-chairs or leads? Do we have that listed anywhere, or so this is just going to be presented verbally now? The other area that I had questions about, and maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, is just around the requirements of each pillar then to hire individually. I know you mentioned wanting to launch the next 4 sort of simultaneously, which sounds fantastic, but we all know it's tricky. And also that partnership pillar will be a bit of a protocol in a way. And I think it certainly has there are every reason to believe it could be, but in terms of contractual piece is often a bit of a sticking point, and fund management and pass-throughs and all those things that can get really messy. So just wondering if there's thought on some of those aspects, the contractual aspect, and then the management group technical experts and identification of those experts.
I think I can tackle the contractual aspect. Perhaps Al and Oscar can talk about quality assurance, because it is something we've been thinking a bit. You're right. In evaluations, we do this, right? The management groups are the ones quality assuring the reports. In this case, we thought of a different nature, but it is something for the I'll leave it up to them, and then we can perhaps hear from others. In terms of hiring, because the funds are coming in to UNDP, at least for the moment, we can choose later a different format. But for now, since the funds are coming into UNDP, and he has a fiduciary role, just used to it, he's used to it for so many years. We are willing to be in charge of supporting the hiring of the commissioning of institutions. We won't do it alone. This is still very much to be led by the chairs and the pillars. They should participate in the panels, do the TORs, as Oscar mentioned this morning, carry the piano, but we will help play the music. And we will be accountable for producing any reports, financial reports, all those things that are needed. So that part is still very much on our side. We are there. So the chairs will not be alone. UNDP will be there as Secretariat to support everything that is needed. I'm going to pass it over for.
On that point, yes, I think you're absolutely right. And thank you for the question, Deborah. It's an important. And I want to highlight that the coalition is already showing its results. We would not have been able to sign contract of a competitive bidding process with AIR without the support of UNICEF. It was UNICEF that had ARR, the long-term agreement, because they had done previous work with UNICEF, that allow us to expedite the process and not to start from scratch. So this is a very good example of how we can continue using these mechanisms of sharing procurement practices among the partners around the coalition, in which, yes, this fiduciary role can continue being of support in the realization of the remaining 4 syntheses with the remaining 4 pillars. However, really counting on the leadership of the agencies which are more specialized in that particular area, and who know also the providers who are more specialized in those areas. So I think that's an excellent question that clarifies a bit how we envisage the functioning in the coming 2 years of the coalition. On the role of the management team and the quality assurance panel, you have a very good point in terms of clarifying let's say, not just the requirements for being part of those technical advisory panels, where we want to have enough diversity and plurality in terms of gender, geographical representation, and expertise to ensure that these panels are really representative, right, of the state of the art in each of the pillars. And at the same time, we were also considering, should these panel members, advisory panel members, be paid honorarium? The inclination is that probably yes, but to ensure, small participation, 2-3 days, to ensure that they have a contractual relationship and the responsibility to deliver that. And yes, they will be there for providing the quality assurance, technical quality assurance for the contractors who will be conducting the synthesis. In this case, will be producing under the management of the management team. It seems like a bit complicated, but I think that's a way in which we can make it work, right? Having dedicated management teams with sufficient experience in managing this type of contracts, in ensuring the quality of the proposal, and in collecting feedback from expert advisory panels to ensure the credibility exercises. Now, to whom do they present this? And the emails that they present to the steering committee, because it is the steering committee, it's the main use of this. And that's a political dimension that will be there, ensuring the take up of the recommendations coming from these services. So that is how we envisage them. But all these questions are extremely useful to clarify how to move forward together. So I hope that we have responded to some of the initiatives, and we may have triggered additional questions from other departments. So let's continue the conversation.
So thanks, Alan Fox, the Deputy Director for UNDP's Evaluation Office. Just a kind of a follow-up on this discussion of fiduciary issues and also the responsibilities of the Secretariat. At this point, we have the partnership pillar piece that's moving forward. Funding for that, initial funding for all of this activity is coming through to UNDP. We have experience with this kind of activity, also being the fiduciary agent for the evaluation group. So obviously, these come into a separate fund, and contributions are handled as is proper in terms of the indication of how they're utilized and reporting. I think as the coalition expands and start taking into account these other killer activities, we as the Secretariat would be prepared to continue that function, but we also may be thinking about other mechanisms. We have in the past had discussions with the Multi-Trust Fund Office on opportunities for utilizing their capabilities and facility for handling multiple accounts. If it begins to expand to the point that it is reaches a higher amount and level of complexity, we can take that into account. Or we can choose as a steering committee, as a group, to continue with the mechanism that we're currently using. pitches to UNDP. Obviously, if there are entities who are hosting specific pillars and choose to want to take that on in a different financial mechanism, we can also have some flexibility with it. So what I wanted to emphasize is that we're prepared to move forward with the existing secretariat or look at other modalities as this continues to scale.
Thank you so much for explaining all these important logistical arrangements, for the partnership. Just initial reactions, I think building, on the experience, like I think in my view, in terms of what you are proposing in terms of streamlining contractual arrangements, so resource mobilization. So it is extremely important if we want to achieve something such a quick turnaround in 2 years. So most probably I would vote for more of streamlining, but of course it's great to know that there are also so much flexibility for different within contractual modalities, accounts and so on. But kind of my feeling is probably streamlining is the best way to go. I wanted to also open another area of questions around the resource mobilization. So, Alana, you explained very nicely in terms of the need, for coordination, but maybe it would be interesting to see how that actually would be in practice. Does it mean that some of the chairs of their particular pillars be a little bit accountable for raising resources, or how that's going to work like in practice? Thank you.
Again, in the spirit of co-creation, and having to sign when reform is correction, I know this. We really want to try to do this joint. So no, I don't think it's necessarily the sole responsibility of chairs to go out there and mobilize funds. But I do think it would be smart to design a strategy that would go together. The chairs and the secretariat, when possible, if it's strategic. Or it could just be that one agency, let's say UNICEF, has a particular engagement with this specific private sector partner, that they are so close that they got into a conversation and introduced the project and brought it to the coalition. So I think it will vary. It would be nice to count on the leadership of the championship of the chairs to take the lead in mobilizing resources, keeping everyone informed, asking for help from all of us, including especially the Secretariat, but not necessarily hold them accountable to, okay, now it's on your own to come up with another $1 million to do the next. I don't think that's how it should be. I think we signed up for a coalition, and that includes member states, not just the 37 UN entities. So we hope member states are also going to be champions in telling us, listen, this particular institution in my country or in another country is specifically interested in this. They have an SDG hub formed of a panel of donors. Perhaps we can partner with them. And then we can go as a coalition to mobilize resources. And then I think we're going to be much stronger. And what we're going to come out of with is something of much more credibility. And if we just say it's something that when women produce together or led, it's more than that. That's my personal view. Right? Just putting out there.
Thank you. Reactions, comments? Right. Moving to the next group is because we were originally speaking about the planet, right? So, but the original indication in the next group is that go to the prosperity dimension. The prosperity dimension, which prices energy, decent jobs, infrastructure, inequalities, industrialization. We have seen potential interest there, people, the United Nations Industrial Organization, and ILO. So they are still in consultations with the headquarters to see if we would be in a position to deploy vision on the prosperity. So still in the process. For the people's paper, which I would say is one of the difficult ones, because it encompasses poverty, hunger, health, education, and gender equality. Well, there is where perhaps we would expect the self-nomination of some partners. We have had conversations with a few of you who are sitting at this table, including UNICEF and UN Women at 40. And also we had conversations with the World Bank, the poverty dimension. So these are in the making. It's one of the most complex pillars. Therefore, we might need not just two, but perhaps three co-chairs from the agency side. And of course, we hope that it's over for expression of interest from the bilateral partners. On the peace pillar, of course, the Secretariat, the UN Secretariat, plays a very important role. We would expect OIOS to have a role there, but again, we are in conversations, and of course, the Peace Building Fund, who has a dedicated mandate to promote peace. So this is what, and people plan was very clear on the partnership pillar. I think we are here. We would have a dedicated meeting of the management team for the partnership pillar tomorrow. But this is more or less what we have advanced in pre-identification, which we would like to confirm, and also really raise the question about the engagement of bilateral partners into the pillars leading position. Can we go back to the questions? John, thank you. So identify, perhaps we are still in the process of identifying, not just confirming, not yet confirming co-leads for each synthesis, right? But if you have any additional thoughts, would be very much welcome. On the steering committee, is there any question that you may have on the proposition or organization of the steering committee? Yes, please. Eva, you have the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. It's been quite difficult to follow the discussion from the sound quality of sound, so I'm not so sure. Maybe you have covered some of the issues. I would like to ask now. So following the issue about the steering committee, I would also like to ask what kind of status or affiliation or something like that you are looking for. And then the second, maybe more urgent question is that how fast do you proceed with this? When do you want to have like suggestions or answers? Because we are having an internal discussion in Finland fairly soon. We are not so organized as yet with this, but definitely Finland is very keen on participating, and we are especially interested in the people, planet, and possibly also the prosperity. So would be nice to hear.
Thank you, Eva, and apologies that the sound is not working so well. We'll make an effort to speak clearly and louder to the microphone. Thanks for that feedback. Delighted to hear that you will be willing to support these two pillars on people and prosperity. Really great news. And on the composition of the steering committee, it's really in the making. We are aiming high to try to get figures such as prime ministers that would really give the gravitas to the overall coalition, but we know that it's hard to get them. So we are moving forward in finalizing the proposals for their engagement. And so we have approached a few of them, Canada being one example, and we have also heard from Spain in terms of high-level representatives from government, Barbados as well, again, at the level of prime minister, but you know, they are waiting for see who else is there to see if they can confirm their participation. And therefore, at a certain point of time, we will need to make a call for giving a deadline and trying to get the highest level of participation as possible. Do I see your hands up, please?
No, thank you. I would also, suggest that many of us are familiar with the UN Blue Ribbon Panel type of efforts that we see in terms of raising particular issues to the level where they can be engaged quite at senior levels for the UN General Assembly or for others who have an interest. And so as we think about this type of a position, that's certainly what we've had in mind, but it's subject to continuing discussion with our partners. The question about how fast, I think that it's quite clear that we are aiming for the first real public presentations on this at the UN high political forums that will take place in July on partnerships. So it's an opportunity to be able to present the first pillar information. We certainly want to and need to have a steering committee that is composed at that time that can actually receive that information. But I think we would want to have this worked out certainly several months before that, so we can, those persons who also have very busy schedules know that they need to aim for that type of a startup. So I think the expectation for setting up a steering committee, in my estimation, really needs to be in the April to May timeframe. We need to be clear.
Thank you, Alan. Right, from Eva, it has been very difficult to follow most of the discussion in the session. I would like to ask, are we receiving minutes from the meeting? Yeah, sorry, I could not join until now. Who is the steering committee? That's Megan. Welcome to the meeting. And from Finland, people, planet, prosperity are presently in their interest. Finland is having elections 1st of April 2023, and there will be a new government to form. What is the recommended size of the technical advisory panel and the management group, if any? Could there be an overlap between the two in terms of membership? We should try to avoid that overlap, right? No, there shouldn't be an overlap in terms of participating into the technical advisory panel and participating in the management group. Therefore, really the technical advisory panel should be of technical experts, right, who are invited to participate. Ideal numbers for those, well, open to suggestions, but in our view, around 10 to 12 members would be kind of the limit for any functional working group. But if there is more interest in that, in order to ensure representations, we could consider. But originally, we are thinking of that size. Below, I don't know, 10, it's difficult to get that level of regional and gender representation, civil society, or that inclusiveness. But I think much larger than 10 is also difficult to coordinate, to have meaningful conversations. So that is based on our current experience. Yeah, but one of the questions that we have been raising in every bilateral meeting is the request to submit names of experts for the technical advisory panel. And that now, for the case of the partnership pillar, has become urgent. So really, we should kind of be narrowing down in terms of closing the deadline for nominations and to move with those that have been nominated, because the technical work of AIR is already advancing, and we'll need very soon to get the feedback from the technical advisory panel for the first pillar on partnerships. And I think on financial mobilization of resources to commission synthesis teams for the other 4 pillars, I think Alan was very clear in what we have a bit in mind, but we need to confirm the co-chairmanships also to strengthen the resource mobilization, which in our view will be supported by the Secretariat, and it's important that it comes in the name of the SDG Synthesis Coalition, rather than in the name of individual members, but with the clear leadership of those individual members co-chairing the management team of these pillars. And the development of a communication and uptake strategy, yes, should be thought from the outset, right? But we would put that as part of the, I would say, tasks of the management teams, right? So that they could envisage for each particular pillar, which is the best communication strategy to disseminate the results of those, including its presentation in intergovernmental fora. All right. We have two more questions. What is the ideal? Sorry, can we go slightly up? So just. All right, Daniel, please, you have your hands up. Daniel?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yes, yes, I would like to confirm what you said, Oscar, already, that Spain is committed to participate in the steering committee. By the moment reaching prime ministers is something challenging, but from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, we agree of being part of the steering committee. I saw also my colleague from Finland that there's elections in Finland this year, also at the end of 2023 there will be in Spain, and I would like to know if there's any requirement from your side to have this sustainability during the 2 years of the process. And later I would like also to suggest for bilateral, sometimes it's difficult to know what is the most practical channel to contribute with financial resources. I heard that streamlining is something that would be useful, and I would like to subscribe this comment. And finally, we will be ready to be part of the partnership pillar, and we would like to think about other pillars, but I don't know if the decision needs to be taken now or we can wait for a little bit. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Apologies for taking the floor again. I think some of the questions that are perhaps coming up in the chat are what I was thinking, but again, thinking about the requirements for the technical experts and your need for inputs, I think it might help people give you these inputs if we were to to drill down a little bit more. And I'm thinking of the presentation that AIR made this morning on finance, technology, and trade focus of the partnership pillar, and that even if simple criteria of, one person from academia and one person from civil society in each of those 3 areas could be nominated, or one person from the global north and one from the global south, sharing about, so we get a little bit more specificity, so people can then, and a table can be sent around. So those of us that might have ideas can be a little bit more focused with those ideas, and perhaps for the other pillars, as soon as there are co-chairs, that perhaps could be one of the first things that they do is try to come up with an agreement on those sub-themes. Maybe it's by according to the indicators, but that would then help us to be able to provide inputs, I think, more effectively.
Thank you, Deborah. Definitely, I think this is extremely important. In the case of the partnership pillar, yes, there are 5 topics: trade, finance, technology, which may be the focus, and still the other 2 systemic issues and capacity building, capacity development, right? It doesn't mean the other 2 are going to be ignored, but they are going to be, let's say, mainstream in the other 3 issues. So definitely, we will work, perhaps we can work on the terms of reference, defining the criteria for the advisory panel. Perhaps even for all of the management group as well, the steering committee, and even the chairs of the groups, because it could be, it may evolve over time as we learn this, what works, what doesn't. But definitely we need to define a little more and then send this around. In the case of the partnership pillar, it's kind of urgent. So I would definitely, we will have our meeting tomorrow, but I will be a bit pushy and ask, please, within the next 1 to 2 weeks, please send names for the advisory panel, because we have to contact these people, get their agreement, and see how this is going to go. So that one I'm going to rush a bit. The other ones we may have a little more time. And the same it will be in terms of nominations for the steering committee. For the steering committee, I will ask member states to, as soon as possible, if possible by the end of the month, although I fully understand Daniel's comment, and I think it's a very challenging, important one, with countries having elections, ministries changing. This will have to be something for us to think about it. Someone may start being the representative of that country in the steering committee, and that may change, but it is something we'll have to tackle as it happens. The other component that I think it would be very important, and perhaps we can talk about it tomorrow, it's the urgency of ensuring that we have access to the evaluation reports. And something that is a bit challenging is we have access to the reports of the OECD DAC countries, but not for the others as easily. So we have to think of that and get their participation as well. So it is something to talk about it tomorrow as well.
Ana Rosa just mentioned it briefly, but let me just reiterate that, and it comes up from both Eva's mention of change potentially on the political processes in Finland, as well as recognition in Spain that there's also a political and election systems coming up in the near future. It would be our hope and our expectation that member states who sign on to be part of this effort don't remove their name once they've added on to being a participant. But certainly we recognize that there may be changes in priorities, which also have implications for funding and contribution. I think those types of changes on funding contribution we can certainly be adaptable for. But putting people on and off the committees, I think, creates a little bit of difficulties on an issue like this. We are here, talking about finding evidence on the achievement of the SDGs. I think even with political process change, to me, it would seem to be difficult for a country to say that somehow isn't important or something that they would not want to be involved in. Nevertheless, I recognize that that's a very important concern for countries who are in this.
Thank you. Picking up on Deborah's participation, let's try to get an agreement then in the ideal composition of the technical advisory group, right? We have identified three main topics under the SDG 17 partnership pillar, one being finance for sustainable development, trade, and technology. Deborah is suggesting that we have two representatives from civil society and one from academia for each topic, or 2 and 2, right? So, so that at least we could have, 4 for each topic. 4 times 3 is 12, right? Which would ensure ideal combination of north and south and geographical composition. So if we agree that 2 representatives of the civil society, 2 representatives of academia for each subtopic of the SDG 17 should be part of the advisory panel, that is already progress. And say then we can focus and narrow search, saying, okay, these are the representatives from civil society that we are proposing. These are coming from these countries or these type of institutions, right? These are the academic experts that we suggest. That's an illustration of how the remaining technical advisory panels can be organized. And I take it as a concrete proposal to move forward. Right. Yes, there are plenty of comments, but let me address them one by one. Right? Okay, so in terms of the technical advisory panel, Shin? Sure.
Hello, yeah. So I'm Shiv. I'm going to be joining Anna's team. Yeah, I saw some comments in the chat on, the kind of profile of people that should be considered for the technical advisory panel. And I think the key sort of input that some of the key inputs that the technical advisory will be able to give is around the kind of conceptual framing of each synthesis, right? At the beginning, and then at the end, how we sort of ensure that the synthesis is written in the right language for the stakeholders, using the terminology and vocabulary that makes most sense to each pillar. So when we're thinking about these representatives from academia and civil society, ideally we'd be thinking about people who have knowledge of the evidence base under each of those domains that we include for each pillar. And those who could help us sort of interpret the findings and use the right language and present it to ensure uptake. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Shiv. All right, we had also, let me see, from Megan, the OECD side, taking off my Evonet hat. For partnerships, there could be good links with the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, the UNDP OECD Secretariat team. Perfect. Personally, I feel North-South labels ill-adapted to SDG theme work. Yeah, that's a good point. Well taken, because SDGs is for all countries, right? Excellent. Very good. There were also some comments around the existing SDG monitoring and review mechanisms and the extent to which this work can be, let's say, this work can use the existing mechanisms. Let's explore that idea further, Eddie. I think that's an interesting proposal in terms of ensuring membership participation, while recognizing that it's kind of a different exercise because this is really synthesis of evaluated evidence, right? However, more communication with the existing mechanisms should be welcome. Correct? I don't see the other comments, but if you can please take the phone or sorry, the mic, and or unmute yourself to make them audible, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. All right. I don't see any hands up for requesting the floor. I would suggest a 5-minute coffee break so that we stretch our legs. We grab a coffee that is here in the same room, which give us the opportunity to transition towards the presentation from AIR on the methodology, right? So that once we have that additional input on the methodology, I'm sure you will be full of questions following up to that, right? So let's take a 10-minute break. Thank you very much. All right. Good afternoon. Let's reconvene then. Thank you for your patience, for our colleagues who are participating online. We will go now to the second phase of this afternoon discussion, and we will start with a presentation from the American Institute for Research. Thomas de Cook, the team leader for this SDG Partnership Synthesis, has the floor.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Also online? Okay, great. It seems that this works. Thank you all so much for welcoming us to these meetings about the evidence synthesis on Sustainable Development Goals, and specifically around the evidence synthesis on SDG 17, the partnership pillar. My name is Thomas de Hoop. I see many faces that I also saw this morning. Just for those who have come in new, I'm the team leader from American Institute for Research of the SDG Partnership Pillar Synthesis. And I'm also here with my colleague, Andy Coombs, a Senior Qualitative Research Synthesis Specialist. We can go to the next slide, please. So for those of you who were there this morning, I'm going to repeat a few things that we discussed this morning, but I'm also going to say a few things that might be new. And specifically, I'm going to speak about the theoretical framework around SDG 17, and specifically about the way SDG 17 can serve as an enabler for some of the other SDG objectives. Then I'm going to shortly speak about the reasons for conducting an evidence synthesis, together with a short discussion of the specific research questions we will address in this evidence synthesis. As you know, we're working with an ambitious agenda, and specifically an ambitious timeline. And for that reason, we have had to make some choices. Again, for some of you, this will be repetition from this morning, but I will have a brief discussion on the selection of some of the SDG 17 components. Possibly in the discussion, we can also, depending on how much time we have, discuss a little bit more about some methodological choices. But in addition to that, when we do so, it might be relevant to link our approach to some of the future evidence synthesis. We have had some chance to think about those as well with AIR. And we will think about specifically like where SDG 17 can serve as an enabler for some of the other evidence synthesis, how we can link this evidence synthesis on SDG 17, and how we can use the lessons learned from this evidence synthesis to guide the design and methods for some of the future evidence synthesis. We can go to the next slide. So just for all of you who were this morning, this is again the theoretical framework. As you know, the partnership pillar of SDG 17 consists of 5 components: finance, technology, trade, capacity building, and systemic issues. All of those components often have 3 types of partners associated with them: governments, the private sector, and civil society. The idea of SDG 17 is really that these partnerships between governments, the private sector, and civil society can generate synergies, and that through those synergies, in combination with specific policies, programs, and interventions in the 5 SDG 17 components, can lead to specific outcomes in the finance, technology, and trade space. For example, in the finance space, it can lead to increased tax revenue, which ultimately can lead to like also larger education expenditures or health expenditures. or fewer needs for debt relief. There's a technology component. Increased internet access is a key outcome there, as well as increased access to clean energy. Trades, exports are obviously like a clear indicator under SDG 17, as well as participation in free trade agreements. There are many more, but these are just some illustrative examples for which we already found quite a lot of studies that we found in the evidence base that we think are going to be very relevant. And ultimately, all of these outcomes together serve as enablers for achievement of outcomes that facilitate the success of other SDGs. So we'll come back to that later. So we can go to the next slide. So evidence synthesis, and I think some of this was also mentioned in the chat, it's going to be really important that we're going to draw conclusions based on a comprehensive overview of the literature instead of relying on single studies. So that also means that we want to address and collate evidence from a variety of contexts, not just from Africa, not just from South Asia. We want to include some evidence from high-income countries as well. But essentially what we want to do is come up not with evidence that only applies to a single context, but see to what extent evidence is generalizable and see to what extent evidence is context specific based on this comprehensive overview of the literature. And when we want to do so, we also want to do that based on specific quality appraisal tools and include studies and primarily rely on evidence from high quality studies. And ultimately, we want to bring that evidence together in meta-analysis and narrative synthesis to generate lessons about what works and why. And the reason is actually because evidence synthesis are a more powerful tool than individual studies to address the key research questions that we're speaking about here. Just as an example, and for some of you this will be repetition, for others this will be new, is like when you look at the impact of vocational training programs, when you look at individual studies, you will see that they often don't find positive impacts on women's income. When you bring together studies, you can have larger sample sizes, you can pull studies in one meta-analysis, and you will see that the results of individual studies are actually a little bit misleading in the sense that a meta-analysis of those individual studies actually does find positive impacts on women's income. You will see that individual studies actually only provide a very incomplete picture of the evidence base. We can go to the next slide. So we will conduct an evidence synthesis focusing on 3 specific research tools. One is a deviance assessment, which we will combine with analysis of voluntary national review data. And we will really look at which SDG 17 targets are currently on track and which are lagging behind. And within this analysis, we will also focus on specific countries that have made the most or least progress on SDG 17. And this will really require access to data. And some of you may have ideas for also like which data to use for this specific research assignment. Then in addition to that, we want to look based on the most credible evidence, what interventions, policies, and program work and are most effective in improving and accelerating SDG 17 indicators. So we want to know, for example, what is the impact of specific trade interventions on exports. We want to know what's the impact of specific finance interventions on governance revenue. We want to know what's the impact of specific technology interventions on internet access. Those are very relevant questions, really important to see how we can accelerate progress toward SDG 17, and which specifically by analyzing which interventions are most effective. But it also asks a rather narrow question. And most evaluations do not focus only on this question, but they also focus on the why and the how. Why are some policies and programs more or less successful in achieving progress towards SDG 17? And how do these policies and programs achieve progress towards SDG 17? For those questions, we will primarily rely on UN performance and process evaluations, and we will conduct a synthesis of those studies specifically. We have developed tools for both impact evaluations and performance and process evaluation synthesis that we can leverage for this exercise. And that will enable us to do quality appraisal for each of these different study types. We can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned this morning, we're going to primarily focus, or that's our proposal, on 3 specific areas based on a comprehensive overview of the literature that we have already done. We have searched in various databases, and based on that, what we see is that most evidence that is out there in the impact evaluation space, in the performance and the process evaluation space, focuses on finance, trade, and technology. There are studies that focus on capacity building and systemic issues as well, especially performance and process evaluations, but also impact evaluations. But those studies often focus on different SDG indicators. So when you would search for capacity building or systemic issues, you would often find performance and process evaluations that focus on capacity building in agriculture or capacity building in education. In systemic issues, you would find studies that focus on performance-based financing related to health or performance-based financing related to education. So based on this, what we propose is that we focus on finance, trade, and technology, which is a necessary choice to choose 3 of the 5 components because of the ambitious timeline, but still ask additional questions on capacity building and systemic issues related to those 3 topics, and essentially ask the question, like, what is the role of capacity building in achieving some of the finance objectives? What is the role of systemic issues in achieving some of the trade objectives? And in addition to that, we also would like to learn, based on some of the conversations we have had so far, what progress has been made in statistical capacity building specifically. This seemed to be like, of the custodian agencies, almost all of the custodian agencies were really interested in statistical capacity building. So that's also something that we want to focus on. We can go to the next slide. Within all of this, what we want to do is we want to focus on outcomes associated with SDG 17 primarily. But we also recognize this as part of a larger project, and that this is the first of 5 evidence synthesis that we'll have. So one thing that we did discuss as part of like the inception phase is that this project, in a sense, will serve as a proof of concept for some of the future evidence synthesis. Peace space in the people pillar, planet pillar, the prosperity pillar, and essentially the partnerships pillar can really serve as an input for some of those future evidence synthesis. Because ultimately, like, one key assumption underlying the SDG framework is that it's an integrated framework, and the partnership pillar can serve as an enabler of some of the outcomes of some of the other 4 SDG pillars. We can go to the next slide. And I think accidentally that slide might have been hidden. I will talk about it nonetheless. One thing, what we can say is that the 4, like when we talk about SDG 17, when it's an enabler of some of the other evidence synthesis, we can already start generating some evidence, or like collating some evidence or some of the other evidence synthesis related to trade, technology, and finance in particular. One thing that we really saw is that there are many studies that actually focus, for example, on the effects of trade liberalization on economic growth, or the effects of trade liberalization on environmental outcomes, or the effects of technology on environmental outcomes. And one choice we propose here is also in that respect that while we will primarily focus in this SDG 17 evidence synthesis on intermediate outcomes, such as exports, internet access, as well as government revenue, we will already start gathering some of the evidence for some of the future evidence synthesis, such that there are like synergies between this evidence synthesis and some of the future ones, so that we already have some of the evidence there around trade liberalization and economic growth, which is probably something that can be done as part of the future evidence synthesis, and which can be done faster. Clearly, ambitious timelines will continue to be the case, as well as more cost efficiently to some extent, because the evidence is already out there and it can already be included in a database. And this will have like a variety of benefits, but also it enables for the fact that ultimately, and I think that's the goal of all the SDG evidence synthesis, that we can come with, like now we will come with recommendations for SDG 17. Future evidence synthesis will come with recommendations that's really focused on some of the other pillars. But ultimately, we want to bring this evidence together and really look at this like integrated framework, and not just come with recommendations that focus on one of the pillars, but really come with recommendations that help to bring this integrated framework together, such that you can maximize the value of specific investments, not just for one pillar, but for all of the pillars. Also recognize trade-offs. There will be trade-offs, for example, between environmental outcomes and like economic outcomes. We want to minimize that to some extent in our recommendations, or not minimize that, but acknowledge that in our recommendations. I think that these are just some of the methodological, this is some of the methodological thinking that we have around how SDG 17, the evidence synthesis, can also serve as an input for some of the future evidence synthesis already. And this is just room for thought for everybody, also to think about how we can like create synergies between these different assignments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Thomas, for the presentation. There's one specific question to you from the panel. If you can speak about the quality assessment of evaluations, and that will be done in screening the evaluations for the synthesis. Thank you.
Sure. So we have tools ready at this point to do quality appraisal of impact evaluations. Those need to be adapted for the specific topics under SDG 17. Those tools are like related, for example, to whether if we assess impacts, whether they really credibly assess the impact of an intervention in comparison with a counterfactual or not. So like, are the studies really able to assess the impact of an intervention relative to a situation where the program or intervention would not have happened? This primarily focuses on randomized control trials, which randomly allocates a population to an intervention and to a control group, and quasi-experimental studies where there is a comparison group, but that comparison group is not randomly determined. So these are some of the tools we have ready for impact evaluations, and we can apply those tools for this evidence synthesis as well. Very similarly, we also have tools that we have ready for qualitative evidence synthesis. And Andy, my colleague here, is really the expert on this. But essentially, they ask very different questions about the quality of studies. It's much more about the reflexivity of the research. It's much more about fidelity of implementation. It's much more about the quality of like qualitative data collection. And those tools are also ready. I think one thing that we really need to do is also thinking about the ambitious timeline. Some of these tools are really comprehensive. When I think about like the impact evaluation risk of bias assessment that we generally use, it takes time to assess the quality of an individual study. And like the gold standard is to do this with 2 people and to make sure that you actually like also make that you have discussions between those 2 people why you chose a certain quality assessment. That's something we can consider here, but we also need to think about the ambitious timeline and whether all of that is required here, and whether we can make that happen also by the high-level political forum on sustainable development. We will certainly apply quality appraisal tools here. What we need to think about is whether we want to apply quality appraisal tools that are common to systematic reviews, or whether we want to take some shortcuts there, because ultimately we want to have preliminary findings and recommendations ready by the high-level political forum on sustainable development. And for that, we need to keep the process also manageable, also on the quality appraisal sides.
Thank you. Shiv, please.
Sorry, Thomas, we probably need to kind of talk a bit about quality appraisal of UN evaluations as well. Remember, we were having a conversation this morning about that. And the idea that, you know, some UN evaluations are already quality praised, right? And some aren't. So maybe you want to just comment on that, because I think they may be interested in that.
That's a good point, Chip. And so one thing to consider is that some UN agencies have their own quality appraisal tools. I'm most familiar with the GEROS quality criteria from UNICEF, for example. Some of the other agencies may have other quality appraisal tools. One thing that we did discuss, for example, is to only include studies that meet minimum GEROS quality criteria. At the same time, we need to think about how we will apply those same methods to some of the quality or to some of the evaluations conducted or commissioned by other UN evaluations, because we need to have standardized tools across the different evaluations. But that's something we need to do. I think we probably want to make sure that we at least rely on the most high quality evidence. That's like one reason why we want to really rely on quality appraisal tools, making sure that the findings are reliable, are valid, are credible, before we include them in the synthesis. At the same time, like some decisions will still need to be made about the specific quality criteria, quality appraisal tools that we will apply.
Thank you very much. The floor is now open for more broader questions and comments. Yes, Isabel.
Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. A couple of comments on the topic of the quality of studies. Just thinking about the reports that we published in Canada. And I think this may apply to some other of the bilaterals, is that we've pushed over the past several years to publish our reports, which are very much targeted to our senior managers. And so they don't have much methodology on top. So what you may find is something that appears lacking in details from which you could do a sufficient quality assurance assessment. So just that may be one of the challenges that you come by. And I think we're not alone in having pushed this, trying to shorten our reports and really only publish key messages and things like that. So it's something that you may be confronted with. You don't want to eliminate, 90% of your sample. Also, I was thinking about this enabling thing. I really like that. And I was also thinking about that question that you have, which programs and policies are most effective. And I was thinking, okay, there's probably some positive correlations between positive partnerships and other SDG achievements, but there's probably a wealth of information about the negative correlations between when this is missing, we can't achieve A, B, C, D. So I'm wondering if you're going to address it all, those parts of the reports, which are probably very interesting. What isn't being done? What do we not know? Because we're just looking at what's been published and what evaluations have been done, but there's probably a whole bunch of stuff we don't know, and that's probably just as interesting. And also, are you going to be tracking those evaluation reports that actually identify areas where we're failing, we're ineffective, or we're causing harm? Because I think those are really important things to know too, from which we could derive really interesting recommendations as well.
Any other questions? Please go ahead.
The first point, that's actually a very interesting challenge about when studies may or may not have an appropriate methodology, but you cannot find out based on the reporting of the studies. What I would suggest there, I don't expect this to be the majority of the evidence. What I would suggest here is probably for each of the agencies around the table, if there are these reports that you consider really critical, that you share those with us, basically as soon as possible. Those can also serve for us as an input into our thinking of what evidence agencies consider really important. And then I think we probably need to find out in some other way about what the methods were if they were not reported. Maybe it's not publicly available, but maybe there's some way to share like the methods with us. I would certainly not want to just exclude it just based on like incomplete information about what the methods were, especially not that these were like critical reports. At the same time, we do need some way to appraise the quality, and we can also not make the assumption that the methodology was credible without the information. So I think we probably just need, we may not be able to do this for all of the studies, because to gather that information for all of the studies where methods are not available does not seem feasible. But for key studies, I think that's a really valuable exercise, I would say. It's like, and we can determine like the details of what a key study means, like, and how many of those we can gather. Like, we can determine that at a later stage. I don't have an answer for that yet. On what we don't know, I think that's certainly the case. I think that comment was also made this morning, I believe, by UNICEF about the importance of like basically creating evidence gap maps, in a sense where like what do, like, if an intervention, if we don't know whether it's effective, what kind of research do we want to do, or do we want to like support in the future that can address those questions? And can it be done in the short term? Like, if currently we don't know whether an intervention is effective, but many people believe that it's effective in accelerating progress towards SDG 17, maybe that requires an additional study. Then I can well imagine that that needs to be done if that evidence gap is there. And certainly that's something we're planning to create, those gap maps to assess like what evidence is missing. Also on the failure, like if we want to like generate recommendations and lessons learned, I would almost say the first thing that we want to learn about is failures, because those are like almost politically probably not, but in a way the easiest solutions to like accelerate progress towards SDG 17 from a technical point of view is to no longer fund programs that are not effective or that are actively causing harm, because otherwise you face resource constraints if you want to accelerate progress by investing in some of the effective programs. And like you would probably, like, by identifying failures, we can identify trade-offs in like funding and finance, and really see what programs no longer, according to strictly technical criteria, need to be funded, and like how to fund those programs which we find to be effective. So I think that's really a critical question. I do think like it's going to be like an important question. I think it's also going to be a somewhat politically sensitive question as well, which we probably need to consider when we do the evidence synthesis, which we can discuss.
Thank you. Thank you for the candid response, Thomas. Kerry?
Thanks, Oscar. So actually, many of the questions that I had from this morning were answered in that particular presentation just now. So I think it's really helpful. So I'm just reflecting on things that I've heard from both this morning and this afternoon, and questions that kind of spring to mind still for me are around the technical advisory group, whether or not we need to also think about having not just subject matter experts on there, but also methods experts, synthesis experts, because we won't necessarily have that capacity within the management teams from all of our agencies. So I think that's also a good, methodological innovations that some may well be aware of in doing syntheses that would help. I think with the co-chairs and the quality assurance process, I don't think you meant to imply this, Anna, but I think it's really important that they're not just there to sort of sign off the output at the end. I think especially through, if we're talking about being more than the sum of the parts in each of these individually commissioned syntheses exercises, what can we say to kind of pull out, and that's what you were talking about earlier, what can we say that cuts across, what can we say that are key messages from all of the syntheses, etc. And I see the role of the co-chairs being pollinators as well as the Secretariat, I think, to kind of, think about that. That kind of links, I guess, also to the data sharing aspect from the beginning. Hopefully we'll get quicker if each time from the first syntheses that we're doing the coding and the data extraction and the analysis, that actually if that's openly available, then when we get to the next synthesis, somebody could also pick up some items that have already been coded and we'll get quicker there. And that makes me think, I wonder whether something when it comes to the risk of bias or the quality assessment, whether that's something for the more less specific work, whether it's something that we could draw upon UN volunteers or people, a bunch. You just need labor basically to be able to do a lot of that grunt work that maybe would free up some of your time to do some of the more strategic analysis. So I'm thinking about that, about how we can bring in bodies. Then I think also from the comments that came back from member states this morning around this is a coalition, and thinking about capacity building and ownership and joint advocacy and uptake and all of that. I think that's really interesting for me, and it's probably too early to start thinking about it. But when we get to the end of this and we have the 5 syntheses, that's the kind of so what? So do we need already to think about having or mobilizing resources to make it a living synthesis so that this can be kept up to date and it's not just a snapshot in time? Do we need to say, what have we learned about building an evidence ecosystem with member states? You know, what does it actually take to bring together all of these different things and support evidence-informed decision-making amongst governments? So I'm already maybe thinking of 3 steps ahead, but I think there's a lot there that we all really ought to capitalize upon from the momentum from this coalition and start thinking in the longer term as well.
Beautiful, Carrie. Thank you very much. These are really very important contributions, and thanks for pushing our thinking toward 3 steps ahead. That's really, really necessary and appreciated. And yes, indeed. I see Shiv has one particular addition to this point. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Kerry said about, you know, we're building this ecosystem, and Oscar, you mentioned it earlier that we're building an evidence architecture. This is a really important point about what we're doing here. We're not just producing 5 syntheses. I don't know if I need to sell this anymore. I'm sort of speaking to the converted, but if anyone needs any more persuasion to be a co-lead or a management group member or whatever, I mean, the end point of this is going to be a huge collection of evidence on progress towards the SDGs, right? Which will be there in the database, which will be coded and categorized according to the approaches, the outcomes, the population types. This is going to be a really massively valuable resource, like an open access resource, hopefully, as we envisage it, for everyone to use, for all the partner agencies to use. So the outcomes aren't just going to be the 5 synthesis technical reports and, you know, the summaries and the proofs. It's going to be this database which all of us, we can use in our own way, take that data, take that evidence and interpret it for our own uses. So I think, and you know, if we do this right, this is going to be a game changer in terms of having that collection of evidence there. Just one more point, Oscar, sorry. Yeah, the other thing that we're doing is, through doing these 5 syntheses, we're actually generating theories about all of the 5 pillars, right? We're putting together conceptual frameworks and theories about how these SDGs, or how to kind of achieve these SDGs. Again, if we do it correctly and we link it up in some of the ways that Kerry's talking about, at the end of this process, we're going to build up a kind of a theory about how the SDGs work and how to progress towards them and how they link. So I think there's a real potential of you know, important evidence coming out of this and building that pipeline that we've been talking about for a long time.
Thank you very much. I hope you appreciate the value of having so many evaluators from the UN system putting their minds together into this very exciting endeavor. Eva and Megan, please, if you can chip in. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think the previous talk was very much on the topic that I was going to raise, and maybe I'm still lacking a little bit of an explanation that when we are carrying out this study, it's one way or the other coming fairly close to the GSDR reports. And when the justification for this was that there are so many hundreds of evaluations and we have lots of different data, and So how would this make it easier for decision makers to take the action if we are again having two major big reports that are both initiated by the UN? And what are the, in a way, the users, and what will be the, where do they use the data that's coming out from this compared to the other sources that the UN is supporting, metadata and meta-analysis and meta-synthesis? And that's what I'm kind of looking for, that because all countries are really carefully looking where they put their efforts, resources, financial, but also human resources, and their prime ministers and all that. So I'm still in a way struggling a little bit. Is this for the UN institutions to know what to do, or is it for countries? Because what I understood, the GSDR is for the countries.
The clear answer is it's not for the UN institutions. It's really for countries. But I think there is a complementarity with that report in terms of the type of evidence that you will be putting together, right? And as we said, the evidence coming from evaluations tend to have more explanatory nature by identifying that factors that led to different levels of performance. Therefore, we see this as a complement to that. And but we would like to invite all of you to the meeting on the specific methodology for SDG 17 that will take place as part of the management team meeting tomorrow morning. In that meeting, we would be able to really respond to the question from the WFP office that you see there, the methods and tools to assess the topics, areas of research of the synthesis, and how these are very important topics are related, focus on the pillar and how it would be included into linkages with the others. And also the use of the coding that was mentioned, right, as a public good. Now we will be moving towards creating that architecture that, as she very well put it, will be of greater benefit to all the participants in the coalition. These are the type of features that would be that we would be able to discuss tomorrow in a more detailed manner that will probably shed more clarity to the various questions that you may have at this stage. I would like to ask if there is any additional hand. I saw the hand from Megan Kennedy from the EvalNet app before, but I think she has left the meeting. Megan, are you still there?
Hi, Oscar. I'm still here. I lowered it because I think a couple other people made the point, but since you called on me, I'll come in on two quick points. One is about, I like the point around focusing in on SDG 17, but I wouldn't hesitate to go even a step further in terms of focusing. And that links to some of the questions about the intended users of the outputs of this work. And I think I had raised this in Turin around the SDG labeling or the SDG packaging becoming quickly out of date. And I think, this is what we're seeing now on COVID, is we're doing a lot of evaluation work that's still trying to help learn some of the lessons from COVID, but nobody wants to pick up a report that's labeled COVID right now, right? Because everyone's moved on. So I think you have to think about that too, is that there's nobody who's dying to get a report on SDG number X. And even if there is that audience will quickly evaporate as whatever comes next becomes the more pressing issue. But once you look down at the more specific indicators, then you do have ready-made audiences and people. So just something to think about. And I'm really excited every time what I just heard about the description of this being more of an architecture rather than an end product as such. And the other, I was a little bit worried when you were talking about SDG 17, it started to feel a bit like a synthesis about capitalism. So, how will we keep the scope manageable? And there's a timing issue here as well, particularly in regards to the climate transition, which is that some of the trade-offs that you mentioned that might be identified in the research are coming on research that is looking at, for example, economic growth and poverty, or economic growth and environmental indicators from a very different market situation than what countries are facing today. So I think we have to be careful about generalizing in those areas in particular, because the economic realities that countries face now mean that you can't make some of the trade-offs that were made by other countries that were growing their economies in, say, the last 5 to 10 years, where the evidence base will be drawing from. So I think that would be one you'd want to flag up quite soon, and not wait until you kind of get to the end of synthesizing information to look at that issue.
Two very important points. Many thanks for the contributions. On the first one, I would say that here in New York, there is a keen interest in still try to push for the achievement of the SDGs. Therefore, really from the Secretary General onwards, during to the intergovernmental discussions and leading to the SDG Summit in September, member states are really interested to see what can be done urgently to address a course correction to the achievement of the SDGs. But your point is absolutely valid in terms of once we start unpacking and see what are the subcomponents behind each pillar, this particular example, finance for sustainable development, trade and technology, those are perennial issues that pertain to the development agenda that will continue to trigger interest even beyond the label of SDG. You're right, and we are building that architecture to be able to extract synthesis about what is working and what is not around that. On your second point, there is a wealth of evidence produced after 2020, and it is amazing how this evidence is capturing the new realities that the world is facing, including the COVID crisis, the food crisis, the oil crisis, and the fertilizers crisis. So you would be surprised to see how much it is already captured by evaluations right now, but your point is still well taken to try to identify how these are affecting the achievement or not of the SDGs. And as I was saying, we will have a more dedicated discussion about the methodologies, where really we will be benefiting from the contribution from the colleagues from the American Institute for Research in solving some of the very pertinent questions that you have posed for today's discussion. I think we are making progress in the way of concentric circles of clarity, right, in terms of moving towards more details in how we move this coalition forward. I want to thank all of you for your participation in today's deliberation. It has been extremely rich and useful for us. And tomorrow we will have the case in point for the management team of the partnership synthesis that will be producing results by July 1st and September. We have here some of the member states who are facilitating some of the negotiations, who are keen to see how these results will become timely for informing their deliberations. And that perhaps helps me respond one of your questions in terms of the use of this exercise. It is from the evaluation community for decision makers be aware of what the evaluated evidence is saying to orient intergovernmental deliberations and discussions. It seems modest in its aim, but if we do it properly, it could be tremendously powerful and really move evaluation from the margins to the center, so that the evaluated evidence is taken up by our member states in their deliberations. With that, let me thank you once again for your participation in today's 2 meetings. Looking forward to see you tomorrow after a good night of rest and hopefully some coffee before we meet at 9 a.m. Thanks very much. Have a good evening.